Oh, Barclay, we're waiting for a few more people to come in before we get started. But just as we wait for the crowd to gather, where am I talking to you from today?
I'm in Queensland, the northeastern state of Australia, capital Brisbane, where I've been holed up, but very, very luckily so, given the weather here and the good fortune that we've had on the COVID front. So we've had a very, very good run. So I feel very lucky.
I saw South Australia is going into a little 6-day, pretty harsh lockdown, it looks like right now.
Yeah, I heard it got some press in the US. They were almost mocking the drama that was being talked about in the media of 17 cases. And I think many people around the world would be feeling pretty happy with 17 cases. But in South Australia, it's a big deal.
Yes, well, everything is relative in 2020. I'm joining from Singapore today, and 17 cases would be a calamity. I think we've had, I don't know, 17 days without a locally transmitted case, and we'll cross our fingers that continues.
Indeed.
All right, very good. Well, why don't we get started with our discussion, and we'll get some more people join as we go through. For those of you who have joined a few of these before, we're going to do this the same way that I've done the past three, which is I've got a bunch of questions that I'm going to ask to Barclay, and I'm going to go through my list of questions, but I would love to get other participants in the discussion. So if anyone has a question they would like to ask, you can either type it into the chat window and send it to the panelists, or you can type it into the Q&A function, just clicking the Q&A button on the bottom of your Zoom. This is the Eat, Sleep, Innovate virtual book club, where we try to talk about some of the ideas that are in the book with either people who appear in the book, which Barclay did not, or people who have used some of the ideas in the book, which Barclay has. So that's what we're going to talk about during our time together today. And just by way of introduction, Berkeley Cox is the Chief Executive Partner Australia at King & Woods Mallesons, a leading law firm. And we're going to talk about change in legal services and how you get lawyers to do new things, which I think is a really interesting topic to discuss. So Barclay, I want to start at our origin story. This is what I've done with all the folks that I've been talking to for this. So it was almost 3 years ago to this date that we met over video conference to talk about disruption in legal services. Now, for our listeners who are not part of the industry, what forms of disruption do you see going on in and around your industry?
Yeah, thanks, Scott, and thanks for having me. And great to be here. Nice to meet you all. And I should just say at the outset that I come to this with a high amount of humility. We got a long way to go on our journey. We've got so many problems still to solve, and it's a massive cultural change exercise for our organization. And I feel like we're very at early stages of the journey. And most of what we've learned, other than the factual underpinning I'll talk about today, we've actually picked up through the good fortune of building a relationship with Innosight. But, on that note, Innosight, I think, defines disruption as new competitors solving our customers' problems but with a different business model, usually involving technology and with a different cost structure. And that was exactly what has been for some time happening to us, and we could see it emerging even more clearly. So we had new competitors in our market. We've got a good solid margin in the top end of the legal market, and we could see new competitors coming in looking to attack that margin, whether that be the big four accounting consulting firms, whether that be startups who had different business models or technology at their disposal where they could argue to our clients that there was an opportunity to unbundle the legal services that we provide and leave us at the top end, but actually where the services were able to be automated or made more efficient, that they would be better placed to provide that service. And there are literally thousands and thousands of startups in the legal industry who are offering a particular product, and that became a more and more obvious threat to us. Coupled with that was client expectations, and we know all of our clients, as we all are, all in business under cost pressure and looking for ways in which our service providers can deliver their services more efficiently and more cost effectively. And we needed to respond to that. It was becoming clearer and clearer, and we were seeing work go to other firms where they might have had a different model which was able to deliver the services more efficiently, and we couldn't ignore it.
So then how do you make the case more broadly? As you know, it was pretty evident to us when we started looking at the industry that there's a lot of disruption taking place, but it's always evident to us. We see disruption wherever we look. Clayton Christensen liked to joke that his wife said that he had the little disruptive diagram in the Innovator's Dilemma imprinted on his glasses. So everywhere he looked, he saw disruption happening. So, it's in plain sight to us, but, lawyers are pretty logical folks, and the data usually lags these types of changes. So how do you make the case for change when the data are not crystal clear?
Yeah, I mean, it's a great point. So lawyers are risk averse, and by nature, that's why they're good at what they do. They also look for perfect information to make decisions, and in this environment, as in many environments, that information is not perfect. And of course, all of us struggle with ambiguity to differing degrees. And so we really needed to break it down, and with Innosight's support, we needed to show that we had enough information now and argue that our freedom to move was reducing as time was running out. And so this is the Kissinger's cross that Innosight shared with us, and that was very real for us. But for lawyers, they love evidence. So we needed to produce mountains and mountains of evidence to justify that actually the world was changing, that we had enough information, and that our opportunity to actually move was reducing. And we pulled that evidence from external, what we're seeing our competitors saying, what we were seeing our clients were saying, and not only just listening to our clients, but actually their behavior and what we were seeing and observing in our clients' behavior. And then we pulled a whole lot of internal data, analyzed that data, looked at the various transformation opportunities, whether that be something closer to the core business or whether it be more transformational, a different line of business using our skill set. Ended up back, closer to the core with a transformation A opportunity using Innosight, well, Scott Anthony parlance, but that's where we landed. The other thing we needed to do was really address the governance challenge, in that the traditional governance model was pretty aligned to the dynamics that I talked about earlier, in terms of we've got a very successful business, we've run it the same way for a long period of time, the margins are good, we don't need to change, or perhaps more resistance to change, and I remember having this conversation with you, Scott. I think it was our very first conversation. And I said, tell me about how we can restructure our governance arrangements in a way which supports this endeavor. And so we set up a new growth council, which was stacked, not with elected board members, but by people that we knew had the right mindset. But we did, to their credit, get the board's support for setting aside an envelope and agreeing to delegating to this new body, this new board, responsibility for driving forward, our transformation agenda with a checkbook of a certain value. It wasn't bet the farm money, but it was good money. And that really set us up in that we had the right mindset among a group of key stakeholders who were influencers in the firm, very successful in their own right, but had the right mindset to make the decisions based on the evidence that we had before us about which pathways we should go down. And it was a very carefully curated process over probably 18 months, to get to the point that we were ready to sort of launch down the journey that we went down.
There's a bunch of things that are going around my head as I listen to the answer that you gave there. The first is just connection to the first person that I interviewed as part of this series, General Chris Deverell, who was the head of the Joint Forces Command in the UK military. And one of the points he made is it's just remarkable to him how the military thinks it's unique, but it's a large organization, and it looks a lot like any large organization. And the thing that I connect to is law firms are, of course, very unique. The people at law firms are very unique, but the sorts of things you're talking about it taking a long time to get the hearts and minds of the people you're working with, about the need to have separate governance, about the need to think about how you make that first bet, that first move without betting the farm so you can generate proof points. It's all the same stuff. It of course has nuances because it's legal services, but it's all the same basic thing. The area that I then wanted to just pick up on it a little bit, you said, where you ultimately landed was transformation A. And for those of you who don't know the reference, that's from the book I co-authored with Mark Johnson and Clark Gilbert called Dual Transformation, where we made the case there are two ways you transform in the face of disruptive change. Transformation A, you're staying in your current business, you're continuing to serve your current customers, but you're changing your business model in a material way. Transformation B, you're pushing the frontier, new markets, new business models. So this is staying in legal services, but finding material ways to change the operating model, to change the business model. Can you talk about what a couple of the high points of Transformation A is in legal services, without giving away any trade secrets, of course?
Yeah, no, of course. I mean, it's just the terminology that you guys use. It's new ways of working, using technology to do things far more efficiently and in a way which delivers perhaps a lower risk product, given the combination of humans and machine is the best combination of all. So, and it's really trying to drive the use case and the opportunity to use technology in what we do, and opening people's minds to the fact that technology can assist us in driving activity, which would traditionally be done in an analog manual fashion.
Well, it all sounds easy enough, but of course, we'll get now into some of the themes in the latest book, Eat, Sleep, Innovate, where we say what you're talking about here is fundamental human change. You need lawyers to now pick up and adopt technology and learn new things and do different things. And one of the things that we argue in the book is you really have to zero in on the barriers, the blockers that are inhibiting change, a lot of which reside in day-to-day behaviors, in the habits, in the rituals of the organization. What sort of blockers did you see in your organization? What are most pressing in legal services, do you think?
Well, the first one we talked about, it was the no burning platform. It's not like we're struggling. Like, we could see these factors, we could see these competitors emerging, we could see what our clients were doing in terms of their behaviors, but still the business was going fine. So that was a blocker in itself. We didn't have a strong internal case for change. We also have a model which has been around for 100 years, and it started in the US, which is sort of a pyramid-based structure where partner success is measured by reference to the revenue they generate, which in turn is measured by the number of hours on the clock that the people that work for them generate. So the incentive for efficiency wasn't there. Certainly we measure profitability, and profitability is a function, of efficiency. But it wasn't obvious enough to them that they could become more efficient, therefore more profitable, and therefore succeed, because their traditional method of operation was a much more traditional model. We also knew the big four were coming, but people would say, well, the big four tried to come into law 10, 15 years ago and they didn't succeed. So, we're not convinced that they're going to succeed this time around. I think a lack of understanding of what tech could do, and then the risk averse mindset. So we really needed to emphasize that the risks of not doing something were greater than the risks of doing something. So, and we were able to do that, I think, by emphasizing the size and immediacy of the risk. The other thing was the partnership model, in that partnerships are a wonderful, business structure in many, many ways, but they do require buy-in and engagement from every single partner who's a leader. We don't have any salary partners. We're all equity partners. Everybody's wonderful human being, great people to work with, but they also want to have a say. And so you can't mandate from the top, this is the way it's going to be. We've got to bring people along, and that takes some time and takes some evidence-based convincing, which was another barrier for us. But by and large, by doing it in a structured and disciplined way, with a lot of evidence behind it, we managed to bring them along, and we've got great support.
It's interesting. I think the equity-based partnership model makes just crystal clear what is true in all organizations. That is, you have to bring people along. And I'm curious just to hear how your experience contrasts with something I heard from another leader. This is a leader. I was at a conference with a client, and it was a kind of closed door conference, so I can't say who this was. but it's the CEO of a company that has had a very, very successful transformation. And the thing he was saying is he found it really easy to convince his very top team of the need to transform. He found it very easy to convince the grassroots of the need to transform. It was what he called the frozen middle, that's just all busy doing their day-to-day stuff. He said the frozen middle was where we had the hardest challenge to convince and change. Does that resonate with you, or is it different in your environment?
And I wonder whether that middle has also got the most to lose, in the sense that the people at the top have probably got other options, and they can see the world, they can see the bigger picture. The people at the bottom, it's their future that's at stake. If we don't change, then it's their business that's not going to be there in the same way it is now, for them as a future generation. But it's the people in the middle who've got, in a sense, the most to lose, and the risk of not doing anything is probably manageable for them, because they'll probably see out the rest of their career, and things will be okay. So I think that's a really telling point, and I think it did play out. So we have clearly different stakeholder groups within the organization, and we needed to try different techniques or send different messages to appeal to the different groups.
Great. Well, let's talk a little bit more about the comprehensive change program. And I will remind people who have joined us, if there are any questions you want to throw at Berkeley or even at me, please feel free to go into the Q&A function in Zoom and type in your question. And I've got plenty of questions to keep us going. The plan for these things is usually around 40, 45 minutes. I've got more than enough to throw at Berkeley, but if you've got something you want to ask, please don't be shy. So you mentioned it's a comprehensive, a thorough change program. And I know that a piece of it involves the tool that's in this book, the behavior enabler artifact and nudges. Can you share an example or two of what you've done? And you entered with humility. You said this is still early days, so we acknowledge that. But some of the things that maybe I should say you are in the process of doing to recognize it still is a relatively early stage effort.
Sure. And so we started with the graduates, actually the more junior lawyers, as a cohort that we thought we could engage and bring actually the firm along, not to delegate responsibility for change implementation, but we knew there'd be a cohort that would be interested in learning. And so we did both enablers and nudges for them in particular to try and accelerate the change. Just prior to COVID, we designed some graduate boot camps, and they involved flying people in within practice groups within a particular discipline, and then giving them a deep dive education, intense education in the technology that's available that has most application to their particular practice groups. So it might be verification software in an equity capital markets type transaction. And then COVID hit, so we sort of, that option in terms of that intense face-to-face training was blown out of the water, but we immediately flipped and actually accelerated the creation of modules online. And we knew that our graduates in the early stages of COVID were not as busy because there was a high concentration of high quality work, which was bubbled up to the top. And so we had a bunch of people who had a bit of capacity. And so by accelerating the training, the creation of the training modules, we're then able to accelerate the embedding of the use of this technology with them. So those graduate boot camps would be an example of a behavioral enabler. We also then removed the targets. So traditionally you'd have a billable target on a lawyer. Well, we removed the billable targets for our graduates so that they weren't incentivized. And we learned from the research and analysis that we'd done that very soon after arriving at a big law firm, you become embedded in this mindset that I've got to get my billable hours up. I've got to get my billable hours up, which is of course inconsistent with the concept of trying to do something more efficiently using technology. So we took the targets off, and then we said, all right, we're going to give you 30 hours. This was in May this year. We're going to give you 30 hours to use before the end of June. Treat it as billable. For you to accelerate your understanding and use of how technology can be applied in your practice groups. And we called it use it or lose it. And that was quite effective. A lot of people took up that 30 free billable. We treated it as billable, clearly didn't bill a 20 client, but we treated it as billable so that they could apply it towards their own output, measured output. And then we thought, well, let's take that one step further, and we're just about to launch what we call a multiplier, which again was co-designed with Innosight, which is to apply a multiplier, again, not charged to the client, but for every hour that a qualified lawyer applies to using technology to their particular project for a client, they get 1.5 hours credit for that. So on their own records, we give them 1.5 hours credit. We only charge 1 hour to the client, but we're just really trying to remove those psychological barriers to doing things in a traditional way, or to put it another way, put the incentive, a high incentive on them to learn the technology. Once they've got the qualification, internal qualification in the use of that technology, then they're entitled to use the multiplier. We also, from a artifacts perspective, set up a hub, which is a dedicated platform on our intranet, which had all the resources, all the modules that were available to not only the grads, but to everyone else, all the peer stories, which tried to demystify what this technology can do and incentivize people. And then we hired a dedicated communications person, and we felt that was very important to actually apply material resources to embedding what we were doing and sharing what we were doing across the firm. So we have a dedicated person with communications background whose sole purpose in life here is to drive this transformation agenda within the firm. And she's doing a great job, very creative approach to video content. And it's something that, if I designed it, I couldn't do it. It's really appealing to the audience that we're looking to appeal to. And then in terms of nudges, the other nudges, we did some awards. So we wanted to celebrate those who'd learned the tools or who'd taken advantage of the use it or lose it, and then hold those people up in lights as people who are champions for what we're trying to achieve, and hopefully incentivize others through that means. So we looked at, a large number of those beans, as you call them, Scott, and we decided what was going to be most useful for our organization based on the nature of our organization and the people within it and the sort of things that we were trying to achieve, and designed, off the back of a long list of about 80, maybe 10 or so, many of which I've mentioned, which we thought were going to work for us. And I have to say, in a sense, they sound a little bit trite, but they really do make a difference. And I've found the very structured and disciplined approach that we've used here with the test and learn and with these sort of bean approaches have made a real difference, and give me confidence that we're actually making material traction, and there's gives you confidence that we're on the right track.
Yeah, well, the notion that it sounds trite, but done in the right kind of thorough way, it can move the needle, kind of docks into a question that we received from an audience member who has asked, Berkeley, can you share any non-technical innovations you have done, like business model innovation, channel innovation, et cetera? The reality is most of what you described here, it's about getting lawyers to learn about and then use technology, but the interventions themselves, they're more kind of day-to-day sorts of things, like use it or lose it or multiply. I mean, there's not really any technology behind that, right? True.
No, that's true. And I mean, one option for a firm like ours, and many of the audience may have seen these options, but is to actually outsource the transformation agenda to a separate business. And that would potentially be a different business model with a corporate structure and a CEO, and then we'd be needing to ask the core to engage the separate business to do the debundled portion of the project, and that's been quite successful for a few of our competitors who've gone down that path. We felt that longer term that was going to lead to potential competition between those two businesses, and that might not serve the core very well ultimately, and a decision might need to be made ultimately as to what you do with that separate business if it becomes successful. And I understand that some of them have become very successful and support the core very well financially. But we felt, trying to take a longer term view, that we actually needed to change, as hard as it is, the culture of our own organization, the core organization. And if we could do that, and we could effectively within the one organization marry up the use of technology and new ways of working with the traditional ways of working, that we would have longer term success. I guess time will tell which model's preferable.
Well, you said at the beginning that the combination of tech and human is unbeatable. And the research is pretty clear on this. I mean, if it's a pure algorithmic task, yes, the computers will always beat the humans. But if it's a task that mixes together some of the things that computers do well with some of the things that humans do well, yes, right now a computer can beat a human in chess, but you pair a computer and human together, they're unbeatable. So that idea of can you really fuse it together and get the best of both worlds, where you get the experience that you have, all the great judgment that your lawyers have, and they're able to go further, faster, and go deeper because they're using technology in the right way. The theory, of course, makes a ton of sense. Now, to get there, you have to overcome some of the hurdles. So, the next thing I was interested to hear, you're asking people to try new things. You're asking people to experiment. And of course, it's pretty well known in the innovation field that you want to be in an environment that's psychologically safe, where it's okay to fail as long as you do it in an intelligent way and you're clear about assumptions and blah, 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 blah. And that all sounds nice, but you mentioned at the beginning, it's a risk-averse industry. I mean, the whole industry exists to spot risk and get rid of it. How do you make people feel safe about failing in an industry like that? I got to imagine that's a real challenge.
It is, and I mean, again, using sort of a test and learn experimentation sort of model, edging out as part of a bigger project, just taking one step at a time, analyzing the success of that step before we take the next step, so that the bets that we're placing in terms of resource allocation are manageable and carefully thought through before we head down a particular path, and analyzed through the governance structures. So any particular initiative or component of the broader strategy that we feel is worth investing in, it will go up to the new Growth Council for them to analyse and scrutinise before it is then taken forward, into the business. But I think that experimentation, test and learn every step of the way to de-risk has been very helpful for us and helpful for, as you say, risk-averse lawyers. I also, at the very early stages when we sort of took 3 teams aside and said, look, we think you're doing the sort of work that we think is more suitable for what we're trying to do here as a firm. We think you've got the right mindset, so we tried to choose teams where we felt there was a greater aptitude for success. And then I sat down with them and said, look, we're going to back you. You need to stop worrying about your timesheets. You need to stop worrying about getting time on the clock. And I will make sure you will not be prejudiced in that exercise, when it comes to calibration of your performance against another performance of someone else who's in a different team. And to try to give them that, commitment that we were behind them and that we had their backs, to drive that commitment from them and that support from the top. So I think that's it. It's the failing's okay, and we haven't succeeded on everything. There's been a lot of little fails along the way, and I think there's enough trust in the system that we accept that that's okay, and we appreciate the work that people have done in trying to take a particular initiative forward. We're going to learn from that. We'll take it into the next project. Does that answer your question, Scott?
No, absolutely does. Absolutely does. And again, one of the things that just really strikes me about this conversation is how industries look different, but you realize there are universal truths. And if you can find ways to smartly manage risk through bounded experimentation, number one, you can go after the viewpoint that innovation and change is risky because you can manage that risk in the right way. And number two, you can get those small wins that get people to say, all right, I see what this looks like. This is not that hard. I can do this too. So I want to just keep with this theme for a little bit. This is not something that's meant to be what I would call in my home country a softball question. I think that translates to Australia as well. I honestly cannot remember. You mentioned the awards that you give out. Do you have one that goes to consciously celebrate people who tried things that didn't work out? Or are they all success-based awards or achievement-based awards?
We had team-based awards. So we certainly had awards, and they weren't driven by what was successful. That was not a criteria. So in that sense, and we were very clear in sharing what people had said about, and there was a lot of meaning in the submissions that were made, which were all about nothing to do with success. It wasn't a factor. It was, the commitment that people had demonstrated in trying to take the initiatives forward. and the effectiveness in terms of bringing people along was almost more important than the outcome itself. And so in that sense, we weren't hiding failure, but we weren't using success or failure as a criteria in the assessment process.
Yeah, the journey's the thing, right? So the more the thing that's being done is cool or interesting or novel, success or fail, this is the sort of behavior that you're trying to encourage inside the organization. I wanted to come back. We've got a 10, 15 minutes left. And again, another call out. Anyone has any questions, great time to ask them. But I want to come back, Berkeley. You talked about bringing in a communications person. It's one of the things that I see organizations often underinvest in or often discount the importance of communication. And you have been very thorough and very relentless and repetitive in your communication. Is that based on other efforts that you've done in the past where you've learned to move your organization? You really need to over communicate to it. Is it just something that comes naturally to lawyers because it's what lawyers do? Or is it something that the group kind of discovered as it was going through this journey? Because I think it is something that is a generalizable principle, that finding ways to share stories, make them accessible to people, it's a very smart investment in my view, at least.
Yeah, I think we see it as cultural change. It's actually the culture that we're trying to change here. Yes, we're trying to use technology and new ways of working to drive greater efficiencies in our service delivery, but it's actually at its core a cultural mindset change that we're looking to achieve. Because if we don't achieve that cultural mindset change, we won't achieve the rest. So, culture change, as everyone knows, is incredibly hard, and our business has been around in Australia for 180 years, and there's a lot of entrenched thinking here, and so tapping into the psyche of different demographics and stakeholder groups within the organisation in a deliberate way was critical. It is critical to driving that cultural change. Having made the decision to head down this path and invest the resources that we did, we weren't going to do it on our own. We might be great communicators in terms of writing a beautiful legal document, but we're not experts at cultural change or experts at advertising, which is what communicators are fantastic at. Bringing about change in people's behavior. That's what we need, and we need experts to do that.
No, it's the combination of the two things. We're fans of the Richard Pascal line. It's easier for adults to act their way into a new way of thinking than to think their way into a new way of acting, which is why we're just big believers in these beans to get people to do different things. But then if you want to amplify that, having ways to capture and spread and share. So it's not, you have to do it a person at a time. There's no other way to do it. But you don't want to have it be you or have it be the New Growth Oversight Council or have it be a reasonably small innovation team that's doing all of it. You want to get some scale effect, and communication certainly is something that can do it. So I've got a question, actually, Berkeley, from a co-author. Co-author Natalie Payne-Shaw has put a question into the chat. She says, how are you holding the most senior people accountable to the change so they don't just talk the talk, but they also walk the walk?
Yeah, it's a really good question. We do it through engagement, and we, through the test and learn process, have identified practice teams, as I say, or sub-teams where we think they're more amenable to bring about the change. So we haven't needed to get buy-in. So there is a bit of stealth here, I have to say, that there are some people that we will not change, and it'll only be when they see others change that they're dragged along. We did have I just noticed this morning an email sharing where there was a session with the partners to the partner cohort in a particular practice group to show them how a particular piece of technology worked. And I could sense from the tone of the follow-up email that there might have been a bit of resistance and risk aversion coming back and people finding reasons to not support it. But we then just listed out every other law firm that's actively using this particular piece of technology and not giving them any room to move. We're a funny bunch. We just like to find reasons for things not to work rather than reasons to think they will work. The entrepreneurial spirit here is something we've got to continue to work on.
Yeah, and balanced with, I was talking about this about our own organization, Innosight, a few weeks ago. We're just talking about what is it like to, for the strategy consultants to do their own strategy. And, if you're a professional services company, most of your assets go home every night, right? It's the human beings. And it's not like you're going to invest in a factory or you're going to go and buy this people or whatever. It's you have to get people to spend their units of time in different ways. I mean, those are the resource allocation decisions that happen inside a services company. And yes, of course, you have to invest in infrastructure and all that. But ultimately, it's the lawyers and the decisions they make every day to do this or do that, or use this technology or use that technology. And you can spend all that you want on the technology, but if you don't get the people to change, then you're never going to get the results that you want. I assume that rings true to you because you're nodding.
It does, and I mean, we try to use, though, Natalie, more of a carrot than a stick, in terms of that accountability piece. So we've built an end-to-end solution for contracting for clients who have supply contracting, large supply contracts to manage, and we're trying to encourage partners who lead particular accounts to take this end-to-end solution out to clients as a means of supporting that broader client engagement as one of a menu or platform of potential ideas to take to a client, and using successful examples which have been tested and learned in a particular team that can be shared internally, and then for our clients, giving them the confidence to take those things out to their clients. The other thing is, we put our highest performing, one of our most respected partners as the chair of our new growth council, and so that it lends a lot of credibility, and he's himself been on the journey, but is absolutely an advocate and is testing and learning actively in his own team. So people see that and go, well, okay, if he's doing it, then there must be something to this.
Yeah, great. So we've got time for a couple more questions, Berkeley. So you mentioned before that we had this great plan to run these boot camps, and then this little thing called the coronavirus happened, and we had to change our plans. So, we're now 8 months into the global pandemic. It's affected the world in lots of different ways. It's affected, as we talked about before, the states of Australia in very different ways. What has the pandemic made easier for this, and what has it made harder?
Yeah, thanks, Scott. And as you alluded to, the training, we've found that the attendance rate at internal training sessions has skyrocketed compared to what it would have been pre-pandemic. And whilst the quality of the experience maybe is 80% of what it would be if it were face-to-face, I think that's overcome by the number of people that are now attending training sessions. And that applies to all of our training, not just in the transformation space, but certainly in the transformation space. The ability to accelerate those graduate boot camps was gold. It was absolutely gold. We just knew that we had a window where the younger lawyers weren't busy to accelerate their learning. And, the engagement wasn't universally super positive, but by and large, the vast majority of them found it incredibly useful. And by tailoring the training that we were giving them to the particular practice groups they were in, and the technology that was useful in those practice groups, they were able to take it back into their teams. We encouraged them to go back into their regular team meetings and explain what they'd learned, and try and encourage the rest of the team to support them in using that technology in day-to-day work. The other thing is the mindset is, I remember we were having meetings with small groups of partners about using an appreciative inquiry model about a whole lot of stuff. And we were talking about working from home in a small group of partners in one of our centres just before the pandemic. And they said it'll never work. It's just, there's so much material that shows that it's just not productive. It will not survive. So just forget about that as a mindset. And of course, within a month, the whole business was working from home, and it completely debunked those theories. So I think that resistance to change mindset has been reduced somewhat. And I also think that we'd had a strong mindset around building supportive teams and the link between wellbeing and performance. And I think that really became self-evident during the early stage of the pandemic, when anxiety and uncertainty was through the roof. And so the role that our leaders had in making people feel safe and giving them that assurance so that they could do their jobs really well became very obvious. And I think that in turn, relates back to this change mindset, that if people are feeling safe and secure, then they're more open to change. And so I think in that sense that the pandemic's been good. And then just people's familiarity with technology, the fact that your laptop has a camera on it. I mean, I don't think I used my camera on my laptop before the pandemic. So there's this, we worked on my background setting here, Scott, before we started. And I mean, just all those little things that a lot of people wouldn't have had confidence to do on their own. But if they're in their home, they can't get the help desk to come around and help them out. It's a lot more sort of solve it for yourself, which I think has been great. On the flip side, clearly, this ethnographic observation where you're seeing people. We'd have our transformation team members going to sit with a particular team that they were looking to embed some change in, and just seeing how they operate together. And that's obviously impossible in this. So that has been a little bit harder. And then those serendipitous conversations, that informal influencing that you get from those chance happenings or those chance encounters, you certainly miss those. So it's not perfect, but certainly lots to be grateful for.
Well, I was just with a group that included some representatives from Optus down in Australia. They start rolling out 5th generation technologies, the mobile carriers. Then, it's going to be almost as good as being there when you get the increase in speed and the ability to do things that look a lot more like virtual reality and holograms and other sorts of things. So ready for the next pandemic. But
Right.
Let's talk about more optimistic things than that. So I'm going to have one last question for you, Berkeley. It's been great. Thank you for your participation. Thanks to everyone who's been listening. But as you reflect on the journey, recognizing it's not done, as you say, there's still a lot of distance to go. What are the lessons that you've learned that you think would be useful to impart on the listeners to this virtual book club gathering?
Oh, I think it's really just if you're firm in your resolve and you're firm in your belief on the fact that the organisation needs to change, then I've found I just had to stay firm in that resolve and be bold and push through and fight the resistance and know that that we had to do something here and that I was doing it for the long-term organisational good as a sort of custodian. So I just needed to push through, and I'm glad we did it. Cultural change is hard. It's really hard. And as I said earlier, this is just such a big cultural piece. I think, finding the best advisors, this is self-serving for you, Scott, but I think finding advisors that are perfectly...
This is not pre-planned. We did discuss the questions, but none of the answers beforehand, but thank you. Keep going. I shouldn't cut you off.
We learned from our client strategy that getting advisors that were in tune with us, that we're able to bring a structure and discipline to the approach that worked for us, given what I talked about in terms of how lawyers operate, was really important. And so, having seen this, how we'd had some reasonable success through some consultants on the client side, and they were well paid. That I knew that you would get your money back many times over by investing in quality consulting support that was aligned, and I knew that we needed someone whose organizational purpose was set up to achieve this for certain organizations, and they could bring, as Innosight did, knowledge of lots of other industries who on first blush would appear completely irrelevant to the legal industry, but when you break it down, as Scott does, it's all the same stuff. And I do think what we've learned is that that structure and discipline, that evidence-based decision-making based on your own internal data points and external data points to make those decisions, mapping things out very carefully, which we've done with you guys, has been incredibly helpful. And then just keeping the creativity going, really giving people freedom, autonomy, supporting them, being clear about where we're heading as an organization, but then just letting people run and letting their imagination run wild and supporting them along the way, I think is the key. We can't control it all to a granular level from the top. We've just got to let it run. So I didn't join the New Growth Council as such. I wanted to get a good group of people to keep the numbers tight, but I've gone to every meeting and I sort of encourage them and support them along the way, and it's been quite an effective model. So no, I think that's a pretty good summary, Scott, of the things that I've learned. Certainly lots. Recognize and celebrate small wins along the way. There's lots of little things that lots of little things that you can celebrate, and if you can promote those, then it has a snowballing effect.
I was on a webinar earlier this week with our publisher and an audience in Europe, and someone asked the question, are we allowed to have fun when we innovate? And I said, of course, of course, of course. One of the themes in the book is I've got 4 children. None of them have burst into the room today. And I don't have to teach them how to innovate because they're kids. They're naturally curious and creative and experimental and so on. So we have the innate capability in us as humans. We have to bring it out. And a little bit of bringing it out is encouraging that creativity, encouraging that fun, reminding people they don't have to be right all the time. It's okay to do something that's a little hard, that might be a little foolish the first time you do it. Because you do it, you try it, you realize it's not that bad, you then adjust, you get the small win. You then communicate behind it. You have the right enablers in place. You've got the resolve to keep pushing through. This doesn't happen overnight. It's a multi-year effort to go and do it, but one day you wake up and it's a very different organization. So Berkeley Cox, thank you for taking time out of your day to share your thoughts with us, and enjoy the rest of your Friday. And those of you in the US, enjoy the rest of your Thursday. Thank you very much, and see you on the next one.
My pleasure. Thanks very much, everyone. Thanks, Scott. Appreciate it. Bye-bye.